Welcome back to the MMA Creators Podcast, and today we have a special guest, the strength and conditioning coach to the Scottish Stars. That's a bit of sibilance right there as well. So we've got an English lesson today, we've got an S&C lesson, and we're going to break down some UFC 305, joined by myself and Leo, of course. Adam, how are we doing this fine afternoon, my sir?
I am very well, mate. I'm a bit busy trying to move away to Thailand, so I'm trying to get my flat sorted and things like that. But apart from that, I'm doing great.
I got told once, my cousin said to me, who coincidentally lives out there, said everyone that moves to Thailand is running away from something. What are you running away from?
It's a very good point. A lot of things. Commitment, failed relationships.
I respect the honesty.
I thought you were going to go with weather, but this went way deeper. This went way deeper, but anyway.
It's been 1 minute.
We're going to get some tears and some breakup advice.
I feel like it's Diary of a CEO podcast. Yeah. Getting his guests crying all the time.
Right, let's start on a lighter note anyway, because that took a random dive off. Let's get into UFC 305 yesterday. Let's start at the top of the tree. Adam, what did you think of the main event? Because coming into it, we had a big narrative, and the fight was pretty exciting as well. What did you make of that one?
Yeah, it was an interesting one, because I actually thought Izzy was doing quite well. I thought he was implementing his game plan well. Dricus has got that kind of high guard, so he exposes his body a lot, and Izzy was kind of punishing that, but it just seemed to just all of a sudden go awry for him. I started to think like DDP was actually slowing down as well, and he was maybe getting a bit more tired and fatigued, but then all of a sudden he had his back and he was choking him out fairly quickly. So it was an interesting one, because I don't think Izzy looked particularly bad. It was just one of those things.
Yeah, I actually thought the same thing, because that's what I thought was so impressive for Dricus is he didn't look like someone that had been in a lot of wars, had a lot of fights, taken some time off and looked rusty. He looked sharp. He looked on. So I was actually a bit like you. He was just starting to turn the tide, and then all of a sudden things just dropped off a cliff. But Leo, I know you was looking forward to this one coming into it. What did you think of it when it actually played out?
Yeah, well, we spoke about on last week's episode, I said that Izzy, if he took the front foot and took the initiative, he'd have a lot of success. And we saw that happening. But one thing I think I have to mention, I don't really see a lot of people saying it, is how laboured he looked. And obviously there's a lot of factors at play with that in terms of cardio, the pace Dricus was setting, but he almost looked like his age was getting to him a little bit. And he's 35 now, so, really reaching the tail end of his fighting career. But yeah, it just looked a little bit slow, sluggish on the punches. But I was happy to see him really take the front foot with his strikes, and that bodywork was probably the biggest highlight of that. And I think you could argue it was, I mean, I had it 2-1 either way. I couldn't really score one of the rounds in particular, but it was a very close fight. So I think it was a case of just a lapse in concentration. And at this level, I guess that's what it costs,
To be fair, what I would say to that is I saw a lot of people saying Dricus was gassed, and I don't know if I subscribe to that, but I think when at any level, any conditioning level, and we'll get into this in your line of work, obviously what you do in a minute, Adam, but you'll be able to speak to this as well. It doesn't matter how well conditioned you are. If you fight with a balls to the wall pace like they did, you're going to be tired. So I don't think he was necessarily in bad shape. I just think that they fought at quite a frantic pace from start to finish, because you think there was a lot of striking. Each man took a little bit of damage. There was grappling exchanges on both ends. So yeah, I think it was just a high-paced fight. I don't think he necessarily looked laboured. I think, like you said, Adam, Dricus was looking like he was beginning to weather, but that's what he does so well. Even when that man's tired, he manages to just step on the gas still. But moving forward with those guys, what would you like to see next for the champion, Adam? Because there's a lot of names being thrown around, and we're getting a bit of a confusing picture at the moment at middleweight. What would you like to see next?
I don't want to see an immediate rematch. I would rather, I think, see Strickland again. But I'm not sure. I don't know. Like, it's a bit of a tricky one. Although I don't want an immediate rematch, I'm like, I don't particularly want to see Strickland again. I think, but I don't know. I don't know. It's a tricky one up there at the minute.
How about Izzy?
Seriously, I do think Father Time has caught up with Izzy a little bit, and I think, what is the point in trying another run? I would say just call it a day. Sail off into the sunset with your millions.
Jeez, you went down that route. Okay.
I think so.
Okay. How about you put him in there? Let me know what your thoughts on this are. How about he goes to 205, possibly, or stays at 185 pounds, but fights Yubrashka?
It's an exciting fight. It's a very exciting fight. But why? Like that's like for him, why?
Yeah.
For us, brilliant, absolutely do it, and we would all watch it. But I'm just thinking, if I'm him, I'm like, okay, it's a good, exciting fight, but yeah, why?
Yeah, no, you are right. I think when you get to that stage when you are someone like Izzy, where he is such a competitor, of course you're going to have that standard narrative that you're not going to want to go out on a loss. And it's a similar to Dustin Poirier, where he was very competitive for large parts of the fight before he got finished, that there's even this little annoying voice in the back of your head, oh, I'm not too far away. And then even you just think financially, I know that's not always a reason to get out of bed for some of these guys that have reached everything, but when you're on those sort of numbers that Israel's on, and you look at some of the big fights and probably pay-per-view deals that he may even be cut into, it is a little bit tempting to look at some of the big names in those divisions. But I do agree with you. What is there left to do, right? You've sort of done everything, so there isn't much left to accomplish. What's your take on this one, Leo? What should he do next?
I think Adesanya or Dricus?
Bit of both.
I think you know my 2 cents. Who have I been harboring on about fighting for the title instead of Sean Strickland? I think there's only one name, and that's Robert Whittaker. But, I think I'm probably outnumbered in that opinion. But I'm really just looking stylistically. I think the first time we saw him fight Dricus, I almost wish it went longer. Obviously, it surprised everybody. We didn't expect to finish that early in the second round, nor for it to be that convincing. But it's just such a fun clash of styles. And, when I look at the alternative of Strickland, I don't really want to see jabbing and teeping for 25 minutes again. No offense to him, because he's a good fighter, but it's just not a style that makes for an exciting watch 9 times out of 10. So for me, it would be Robert Whittaker. He said two fight win streak. The Aliskerov uppercut really just propelled him a little bit even further. And it's just a shame he's fighting Khamzat Chimaev. I mean, if he beats him, for me, there's no doubt. I think Dricus will still be recovering by then. We'll see. I don't know, but if the stars align, that's what I love to see. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, you brought him up, and I do honestly think if Chimaev goes out there and gets a big win, I think he steals the limelight.
Yeah, I think he'll leapfrog it.
I think they throw him in the title picture. But talking about title pictures, we had Kai France and Steve Erceg on the co-main. Adam, what did you make about this one? Because to be honest, obviously it was an impressive performance, but tell me what you think about this. Coming off a 5-round war with Pantoja in May, I think, and we're in sort of mid-August. It felt a little bit soon, but what did you think about the fight in general?
France is an absolute little monster. There's a boxer called Nick Ball, British boxer. He reminds me the exact same as him. He's much smaller than everyone, but he's super aggressive. He comes forward and he just throws big, massive overhands. And he's exciting. He is exciting. I like watching him. He gets a lot of finishes. And maybe it was a little bit too soon for Erceg, but I kind of like the fact that Cara France won. Not to say I don't like Erceg, but I think it's going to be more stylistically a bit more exciting, because he should get a title shot, I presume.
Yeah, it's a weird one at the moment in flyweight, isn't it? Because it is a little bit all over the place. But obviously we'll get into your line of work a little bit more specifically. But I do want to just touch on this before we do, Adam, because it was a lot of the conversation coming into these fights for Dan Hooker, Kai France and Izzy, and we'll talk about Dan in a second. But a lot of them spoke about their strength and conditioning, or their new strength and conditioning program, if you like. What do you actually know of that, of what they've done, if anything, and how much do you think that actually impacted their performances across the board?
I like their strength and conditioning. Like, I'm not someone, as you know, to shy away from being critical of people's strength and conditioning, no matter what level they're at, no matter who it is. I'll just say what I think. But I actually do think their strength and conditioning is good. I like it. Yeah, I like it. I rate it. I know. Well, we follow each other on Instagram. I don't know him, but the strength and conditioning coach at Izzy, and he does good stuff. So I'm quite impressed with their strength and conditioning. I like how they implement a little bit of old school training as well, with it's kind of called Fight Gone Bad, or Spider they call it, which is basically just 5 rounds of absolute chaos. And I think, although like maybe sports scientists wouldn't like that because it's too chaotic, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint what adaptations you're getting. But I think sometimes we need a little bit of that old school grindy mental toughness kind of training occasionally, not all the time, but occasionally. I think it's good.
I really want to dig into that a little bit deeper in a second, but we'll circle back to it. You mentioned chaos there. Chaos, Dan Hooker versus Mateusz Gamrot. From start to finish was a bit of a war, to be honest. We saw Dan Hooker in the corner, battered, bloodied, looking like he was in some weird euphoric state. It was a bit weird. Leo, what did you think about this one? Because this was a good one.
So it was almost psychopathic seeing him laughing in the corner. I mean, to be honest, that's probably being a bit generous. Let's call it what it is. But, I think as fans, we got to be grateful for guys like him because, they bring it, throwing caution to the wind, completely throwing any sort of game plan out of the window, with the alternative being just violence. And that's what we got. It was brutal. I think that's probably the word to use. I loved it. A good fight. Decision was very close. I saw a lot of people claiming robbery. We do this every week. I'm tired of hearing that word.
Stop that.
I think the only time you could have used it last night was that one judge who scored the Tai Tuivasa Jairzinho Rosenstrike fight, because I'm still scratching my head about how you can give him 3 rounds. But that's besides the point. It was a good fight. I don't think either man's stock has really gone down. But I guess it's just a testament to how good Dan Hooker's conditioning is to be able to set that pace, stuff those takedowns, and keep marching forward. Because a lot of the times you see when people gas out, they tend to take the back foot and the other guy takes over with the full pressure. Dan never wavered on that. For the entire 15 minutes, he was always pushing forward. And that's really what won him the fight.
Yeah, for sure. I think against someone like Gamrot as well, that he always wants to be on the front foot. He wants to go to that wrestling, those single legs. The worst place for someone like that is moving backwards. Not only is it taxing on the conditioning, but also it's just hard to get your wrestling going. I think Dan recognised that and just started melting him away. And I can't help but think that if that was a 5-rounder, probably would have got the finish. But looking at Dan Hooker now, Adam, it puts him in a bit of an interesting spot, right? Because he's a veteran in the division. He's been in some legendary fights. And the top of the lightweight picture at the moment is a little bit of a mess because we've got a lot of the top 5 guys coming off a loss. How would you like things at the top to sort of shape out in 155?
That is a tricky division, like you say. It is a bit of a mess. We don't know what's going on there, and I don't know if Dan has done enough to propel him all the way up that division. Like, I think it was a very, very close fight. I thought Gamrot would have more success with his wrestling than what he did, and I thought Dan did very well at kind of nullifying that, although he did get taken down. But I don't know. I would have to go and look at the rankings and see where they're all stacking up and what my thoughts are on that. But it is a bit of a messy division.
Let me throw some names at you, and then I want to just get your take off the top of the dome, right? I'm going to throw a few names at you and tell me what sounds toasty to you. We have, of matchups that would make rough sense, we have a potential rematch with Dustin Poirier. We have Justin Gaethje floating around. We have Charles Oliveira floating around. Beneil Dariush is in the mix. What takes your fancy there, my friend?
First one you said, Poirier. I think that would be... Yeah, I would like to see that. I'd run that back. I would like to see that, actually.
Yeah, I think that makes actually a lot of sense because Dustin has been flirting online a lot, saying that he wants one more. And I think... You know what? It's one of those fights that you kind of almost don't even want to get made because you know for a fact they're just taking years of their life in that. It's just like...
And it would never probably live up to the first one, right? That fight is that fight personifies COVID Apex lockdown fights. That's one of my favorite fights ever because you could hear every single punch. And at that point in time, it was quite a novel thing. So it's one of my favorite fights. I almost don't want that matchup to be made. I think what makes sense... To me, personally, I think Beneil Dariush, you've got guys probably in 2 opposing trajectories. Dariush is getting on. There's an opportunity there for Dan Hooker to sort of leapfrog him. And stylistically, it's a fun one as well. So that's probably what I would do.
Outside of those main fights, because we did have some decent ones on the main card, and there was a few decent performances as well sprinkled in. But did anything jump out to you, Adam, on the entire card, just in general? Who stood out other than the main talking points?
I thought, well, obviously I've got to shout out Casey O'Neill because she's Scottish.
Course.
So
Of
she got
course,
back into the, well, partly Scottish. We'll count her Scottish. So I've got to shout out Casey O'Neill. I think she did well to get that decision win. Walker getting a win as well in a kind of strange ending. But that was good seeing him win.
Break that down for us. For anyone that's listening that didn't see that, break that down for us. What happened, please?
So I think, was it a heel hook he got put in?
I believe so, yeah.
And then he kind of screamed, but he didn't tap. And the referee, so he screamed in pain, but he didn't tap, and the referee stopped the fight. Now, I don't know technically the rules in terms of. So what is
verbal
the rule
tap,
if you
right?
scream in pain? Is that verbal tap?
That's a verbal tap. So under the rules, under the laws, the guidelines, whatever you want to call them, if you scream, involuntarily scream, it goes as a verbal tap. And even more than that, when you're getting warmed up in the back and you're getting your hands wrapped and they're going through the rules meeting, they do tell you that. So it's not as if it's just buried away in the sort of the X's and O's, you know, of like the small details. But it was a bizarre one, wasn't it? Because he weren't having it, and then he goes and slaps him around the chops as well.
Yeah,
it was a bit of a weird one.
And
but
now Walker wants his brother. I saw him calling out his brother. He wants to fight the brother.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Most Walker family thing to do.
He does look like his sort of autistic brother, though. He does look like that sort of vibe, that sort of setup in the family. But Leo, what jumped off the page at you? In Perth?
I think the one that came to me was Carlos Prates. You know, sadly, because I think everyone's a fan of the Leech, but seeing him knock that man out with a brutal shot. I can't remember if it was a left or a right, but just against that fence, it was just right on the jaw, you know, slumped him. It's what we needed. It gave a nice little boost to the card. And I don't know how many wins that is in a row for him, but
I think it's 4.
You know, beating the Leech, yeah, I mean, big step up for him needed, I think, now. I mean, you could argue the Leech probably was. That guy's been in the game for quite a while, you know, seasoned player. So, yeah, I mean, that one stood out to me. I mean, we spoke about Kaikara France, of course. Well, what else was on there? I mean, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, no,
You're the one asking the questions.
I would have gone for Carlos Prates as well, because he's now finished all of his opponents. And then you look at that welterweight division as well. It's just getting a little bit saucy all of a sudden. We've got a new champion that's sort of reinvigorating things at the top, because we're seeing some fresh matchups, or at least hopefully going to see some fresh matchups. We've got some young talent in there like JDM. We've got Shavkat. We've got Ian Gary. We've got Michael Morales that I'm very high on at welterweight. Sean Brady's even put together another win. Now we've got Carlos Prates. So yeah, I think welterweight's looking seriously healthy. It's a little bit of a sleeper division at the moment. But moving away from UFC 305, Adam, let's jump into a little bit about you, my friend. Let's get into a little bit about what you do. So before, I've got a few things that I sort of want to ask you and get into. But before we get into it, if you could just give us a brief overview of what you do, whether that be in real life and actually online as well, that would be fantastic. Because not only do we speak about MMA here, obviously it's also the sort of digital creator side as well. So we like to mix the two. So that would be great.
So basically, I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I work with elite level athletes from UFC fighters to guys just starting out their career, boxers, footballers. And I work with athletes predominantly nowadays. With my social media site, I'm trying to get across. I find a lot of strength conditioning social media, it's not geared towards the athlete. And what they try and do is they try and make it very complicated. They make it very confusing, and they use big, massive scientific words. And they're almost trying to show off how smart they are. And I try and step away from that and actually think, who am I trying to get across to? And I'm trying to get across to the athletes. So I try and break it down as basic as I can for them. And that's what I do across my social media platforms, as well as reviewing other high-end athletes' social media. Oh, sorry, strength conditioning.
Yeah, I really do like that approach, because I think you're spot on. I think the reason why people do that, number one, I think it's a bit of a projection, just an ego thing. I think number two, it also sometimes helps them sell things. If they can use certain terms and sexier phrases, it sort of helps them sell courses and books and all of that sort of thing. But if your whole MO is simplicity, for people that are listening, obviously we always hear S&C, strength and conditioning, but get into the very basics of this actual word. Please actually tell us what is strength and conditioning, or especially what is it in MMA terms?
It's just simply all about improving your performance and getting you to the octagon or that cage. That's all it's about. It's the word strength and conditioning. It kind of, I don't believe those are the most important things. I think injury resilience is the best thing for an athlete, because you can be the most explosive, fittest guy in the world, but if you can't make it because you're injured, then what's the point? So that is my kind of main thing, is getting my athletes to the actual event and to the fight in the healthiest way possible.
I think there's always... MMA is still very new, right? So people are still trying to figure things out on the fly. We're trying to take from different sports, and MMA is a very unique sport in itself. But just from your opinion, I can imagine you're going to say this is case to case, so please elaborate if it is. But how do you go about finding that perfect balance of supplementing the training and not taking away from what they're doing maybe in their sessions with their skill-based work?
So, like you say, it is case to case, but it's also day to day. And what I mean by that is it will be completely dependent on how that athlete's feeling. We always say the program is written in pencil, not pen. So it will change every day if it needs to. If that athlete comes in and says, "Oh, I've had a really hard spar," or maybe they've had a terrible sleep, or maybe they've had an argument with the missus, whatever it may be, they are all indicators for me that athlete is now slightly fatigued. And we'll use subjective indicators and objective indicators, like things like your whoop band or your Oura ring, and they let us know your heart rate variability and all that kind of fancy stuff. And we'll go completely dependent on that, because otherwise, especially with the sport being MMA, and people are very tough in MMA, tough guys, like, so 9 times out of 10, I'm always having to pull my athletes back rather than push them to do more work. And if we didn't have objective and subjective indicators, what would happen is you would just run yourself into the ground, and you would just keep on training until the point where you got ill or you got injuries, and then you would try and train through that, and it's just a snowball effect, and then it's an absolute disaster.
I'll chuck it over to you, Leo, in a second. I just got one thing that I want to ask you. So if we just start from scratch, right? So if we're listening to this and let's say we're a high-level amateur or a low-level professional, right? If I just walk into the gym doors and I come up to you and meet you and say, right, Adam, I have no prior strength and conditioning work. Maybe I've gone to the gym a little bit, but I train 4 or 5 times a week, whatever it may be, what my schedule looks like. Where do you go from there? What's the protocol to do maybe some testing or to find out where my level's at or what I need?
So the first thing I would do is I would sit you down and we would have almost like a psychological evaluation about who you are, what's your background, and it would be very informal. I feel like if you sit someone down and say, "This is a psychological evaluation," like, whoa,
that sounds intimidating.
Yeah,
it was a bit intense.
First time I've met you, and you're doing this, right? But I'll ask them things like, "Who are your favourite fighters?" And that gives me a clue, because if you say Mighty Mouse or if you say John Jones or someone like that, they might be different people. You know what I mean? They might be, or George Masvidal.
In what way?
Yeah.
So that kind of goes back to GSP said this. You've got the martial artist, you've got the fighter, and you've got the athlete, and all these kind of 3 different kind of people. And you're trying to figure out what this person is and what kind of motivates them. Is it money? Is it success? Is it family? Whatever it is, because then what you're going to do is you're going to use that when you're trying to motivate them when they're on the assault bike and it's getting really tough, right? So we'll do that. Next thing we'll do is a movement analysis. A movement analysis is basically seeing how you move. Can you move fluid? Is there any issues with your hips? Is there any issues with imbalances of strength? Maybe you kind of sway to one side or favour one leg when you're doing a bodyweight squat. They're all little indicators for me. Have you got what we call the ankle flexibility there, so that you can do a deep kind of penetrating double leg? If not, we'll need to improve that. These are all little clues that I get, right? Then we'll go on and we'll do power tests. So we'll have a thing that kind of tracks how high they jump, and we'll do various different power tests to kind of, again, give me more clues. And that is all what the first session is about. It's all about giving me clues about who this athlete is, where is their strengths, where is their weaknesses, and what we can develop. We'll do technical aspects of like lifting, so I can make sure I can program them and they're nice and safe when they're doing it. And then we'll do a little bit of conditioning test at the end as well.
Yeah, that's good. You said, all of these things, their approaches towards, gearing towards athletes. And obviously we're speaking here, specifically within the realm of fighting. Mm-hmm. Is there any approaches you take, with your planning? And, is there like a universal truth across sport, across various different, disciplines, not just within the world of MMA?
Yes, no. Like, if you want to get strong, you must lift heavy. It's as simple as that. You're not going to get strong by lifting 10% of your 1 rep max. It's just not going to happen. So there's a universal truth there, whereas if you want to get strong, lift heavy. But everyone's different, and because everyone's different and the sport's different, and also with MMA, the game plans can be completely different depending on who you are fighting. So there's never one size fits all. Now, don't get me wrong, see, for like maybe 90% of the people listening out there, if you get a good strength and conditioning program, you will see massive improvements, right? But when we get to the UFC and the elite level boys, we have got to take in consideration game plan. Do we need more lateral movement this time? Okay, well, we need to implement this into the game plan. Are we going to be taking them down? Is it going to be wrestling heavy? Well, then we need to work isometric strength a little bit more. And these kind of things play a massive factor.
Go on.
Yeah. My brain's just completely gone because of that.
Well, let me step in quickly, just because I just wanted to rewind a touch, Adam, because you said there when people come in, right, and you do these assessments. Sorry, Leo, I completely scrambled. No.
My brain just fried. You're good.
No, you're all good. So you sit these people down, you do the assessments, you do the psychological assessments, you're just having a more general chat, and then obviously you start doing some of the lifting and whatnot, and then you help finding out their program. I think what I always found in the fitness industry, right, and it's still rife, and I know you'll have the same thing in the sort of strength and conditioning world, so I want to get your sort of take on it. I think there's so many things constantly changing and people giving different opinions that sometimes we get very simple principles, like what you said there. If you want to get stronger, you have to lift heavier. You're not going to get stronger lifting 10% of your 1 rep max. That's a very simple principle that you said is applicable throughout the world. It doesn't matter where. And sometimes I think we get away from these things in things like fitness and things like S&C. We get caught up with a lot of different new studies and bro science. When people when people come in, what's one, if not a couple of things that are typical misconceptions that people have?
There's a few, and don't get me wrong, now over time it has got slightly better, right? With people being a little bit more educated with strength and conditioning, but I still get lifting makes you slow. Heavy lifting will make you slow. I get that constantly. So that's a massive misconception because it's actually the polar opposite. Now, obviously, if you go too far and you just do heavy lifting, there'll be a point of diminishing returns and you might become tight, you might become just a little bit stiff, and we don't want that. But that's why we do speed work as well, and we lift things fast and explosively. So it's just letting them know that. But a massive one is road running. Because of boxers and the history of road running, that is kind of transcended into MMA, and I'm just trying to let them know, guys, we don't need to do a 10 kilometer 2 times a week, right? We don't need to do that. We could do, there's a really good one that I do, 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 4 times on the treadmill. That's 16 minutes of work compared to what you would be doing your 10k, right? So that. Now, don't get me wrong, why? Well, good question. Because see, when you're doing a 10k, you're just overuse injuries. You've got so much impact on the joints constantly, right? Whereas we want to get the maximum amount of kind of aerobic benefits with the least amount of work, right? Whereas when you do a 10k, you'll get good aerobic benefits, don't get me wrong, but you're doing way too much work. You're just doing over what you should. And then this is when we start worrying about injuries and recovery and things like that. And it just has a knock-on effect to everything else. Don't get me wrong, it's not terrible if you are doing it, but there's better, more optimal ways to get your conditioning in.
Yeah, I think this is where a lot of the water gets muddied, because people believe they have to take a very polarizing view. Well, I can't go running? Running's bad? No, let's just add a little bit more nuance. It's not bad. It's not going to be not beneficial in some regard, but it's just going to be suboptimal. And you said a good word there. It's just about sort of finding those efficiencies, right? It's almost like trying to find the shortcuts. Get the maximum output, get the maximum result, but not have to maybe beat on your body. And I think that's one, roadwork's a really good one that you brought up, because that's one I see often a lot. People running extensive distances, and when you're training kicks and knees and punches, like with all of these different limbs, it's a lot of wear and tear anyway over the years. Wrestling, of course, jiu-jitsu, your limbs just getting flipping pulled apart. So that's always a good one to bring up. But also just touching on that as well, just coming back to sort of a more beginner aspect. Of course, there's some of the misconceptions. What are some of typical weaknesses that you would see? I know you said about ankle mobility there. I imagine that's one. But what are a few that you see there?
So there are areas that are usually tight on MMA athletes, and usually we're going to be talking about our hips and our shoulders, because we're very rounded forward. We're always here, and this is called kyphotic. We're very kyphotic, rounded forwards. So the ability to kind of do this motion and press overhead is usually quite restricted, right? So we don't want them to be like this, right? So, well, we do slightly, but we don't want to have it too much, you know? Hips as well, we're always kind of down, sunken in. So we need to open up the hips, right? Get a bit of flexibility in the hips. That's usually where I'm going to see most of the mobility issues. 9 times out of 10 as well, people are just not strong enough, and they can get tons of benefits by just getting stronger, because strength is what we call the foundation of all kind of athletic performance. And what I mean by that is if you get stronger, you're going to improve your speed, you're going to improve your obviously your strength, you're going to improve your power, you're going to improve your conditioning even. So by doing one thing, you've actually improved a lot of things. So that is probably one of the 2 main things I see is hip mobility and shoulder mobility, but also just strength in general.
Yeah. You spoke earlier about ensuring that your clients don't push themselves too far. That's a problem you seem to run into. In the case of that happening, what is the contingency plan, or I guess what does it look like for you when someone you're working with gets an injury of a varying degree? Because obviously your approach is going to differ each time.
Good question.
Particularly within the scope of MMA, what does that look like for you?
So this is where I maybe differ from some of our coaches. I'll say it could just be something like an illness. Say they come in with the sniffles, or they've got a wee cold, or whatever it is.
I'm gonna need sniffles on just a repeat word with your accent.
So if they come in with the sniffles, right, that's a sign of overtraining, right? So it's a little clue we're overtraining. When your immune system kind of gets low, and you start getting these cold sores or colds or whatever it is, right? And it might just be on that day we'll pull them back a little bit from training, and I'll not even tell them. I'll just kind of say to them, we need to do 4 sets of this, right? When really I programmed in that we're going to do 5. Or likewise, we've not got the assault bike at the end today. When I actually did have it programmed in for today. But if I tell them we're not going to do the assault bike because you're feeling fatigued or because you're feeling a little bit run down, again, 9 times out of 10, going back to what an MMA athlete is like, they'll go, no, I fucking want to do it, right? So that is a way that we're just going to pull them back. We're going to have like a mini deload, and we're going to basically try and help them recover. And now if it's an injury, we're always going to try and work around the injury, because for everybody that is out there doing MMA, you're probably going to get injured at some point. It's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. You will pick up little injuries. Doesn't mean to be serious injuries, but there is going to be strains there. So we need to work around. We can't just shut down camp because you've sprained your ankle or because you've maybe slightly torn a muscle. We just will adapt and we'll work around it.
Something that you
sorry, mate.
Go on, Leo. I just want to touch on something there. Sorry to butt in there, but it's just because you mentioned deload there. And that might be a word that people are quite unfamiliar with. And I would definitely say this is something which is, for the most part, neglected, I think, in MMA, just because, like you said, it's that sport which is all about toughness, is all about outworking your competitor. Could you just please explain in layman's terms what that is and why that's important?
So a deload is just a reduction of volume or stress on the body, essentially. So you can do it multiple different ways. You can deload by reducing volume, meaning sets and reps. You can deload by reducing the intensity, like the percentage of 1 rep max that you're lifting. There's tons of different ways to do it. Now, what I like deloads, but what I don't like about deloads is when it's fixed. And what I mean by that is some people will say, you do 4 weeks on, so you're trying to get stronger, stronger, and then you do 1 week off, and that's your deload week. The problem with that is it doesn't take into consideration life. It doesn't take into consideration the fact that your 2 kids have been up all night and you've had 0 sleep. And it doesn't take into consideration that your nutrition's been terrible or whatever it may be. That means that you might need that deload before the end of those 4 weeks. You might need it on week 2, about 2.5, and you might not need a full week. You might need 3 days, right? And that's why we use objective indicators to kind of dictate when we do that and how long we do it for.
Right. And you spoke about, obviously your whole thing encompasses working with athletes. Is there anything that differs, besides sort of scaling everything up in terms of what you're doing? That's working with normal people. Is there anything that might surprise anyone listening that comes with new challenges that working with just regular clients? I hesitate to say normal people, but people that aren't professional cage fighters.
Normies.
Yeah. Let's go with that.
What's interesting? It's my opinion that we're all athletes on some level. Right,
I like that.
We can all train like an athlete, and I know from personal experience. I used to train like a bodybuilder, right? I know from personal experience when I made the switch from training like a bodybuilder to train like an athlete, how much better I felt. Right, movement's better, just energy's better. I just felt better and stronger and just more athletic. So I always try to get across that. Okay, I might be training Paul Craig for the UFC fight and wherever, right? But if you want to come on and train like an athlete, I'm still going to be training you like Paul Craig gets trained. It's the exact same. Now, obviously, if you're a 65-year-old woman, I'm not going to be having you do max deadlifts and then some sprints at the end of the
Every for the week.
But the principle of training like an athlete, I think, is something that everyone should be doing.
I like that. I like that a lot because I think you're right when you said about, I mean, I can relate to that. I can resonate to that a lot in regards to used to training in a more bodybuilding vein. And I don't think I train particularly like an athlete now, but I definitely prioritized more sort of mobility work over the months, over the last year or so. But that's just another point that I want to sort of talk on. And I know we spoke about this briefly before, Adam, but that's another thing that we hear a lot of in MMA, or more so now. I think it's probably a little bit of a newer topic, not completely, because we have people like GSP and whatnot, but we hear flexibility and mobility a lot. So I know you did before, but if you could please again just explain the difference of what that is to the people listening, and also the importance of that, because again, where we're in this very macho sport, it's all about outworking your competitor and lifting and hustling and wrestling. Sometimes telling people to do a little bit of yoga, a little bit cram session is not always well received. But yeah, if you could just highlight those, then that would be appreciated.
Yeah, so the difference between it's like mobility and flexibility. So mobility is more your active movement. And what I mean by active movement is like how high can you lift your leg by yourself, right? That is your mobility. But you can get it much further than that if someone's pushing your leg. But that's flexibility, okay? But we don't want to be too flexible, because what happens is we're actually weak in that end range, right? We want to have mobility in that range. We want to have strength in that end range. And that's when mobility is very, very beneficial to the athlete. Now, obviously, there's certain moves that require flexibility, like if you're pulling rubber guard or whatever. But you would rather have mobility than flexibility, if that makes sense. The reason for that as well is you're going to be able to generate more power. I know, well, we spoke about this briefly, but very quickly, if you have got good what's called thoracic rotation, which is your ability to twist your upper spine, you can basically throw your cross much more fluid and easily. Whereas if you were stiff and you couldn't, it wouldn't come out as snappy as fast. And then you would also reduce your reach. You would also lean over into your shot and you'd be off balance. So it has a cascading effect, mobility, and it is very important for my athletes to be doing it. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, well, not a lot of people put emphasis on it when they probably should.
Yeah. Just quickly, something I picked up on that I found really interesting is what you said earlier. When you meet someone who you're planning to work with for the first time, you're not necessarily psychoanalyze, but you sort of delve into their psyche a little bit, and that's something we talk about quite a lot on here. Is there any sort of practical elements in that regard, so less so physical, that you tie in to exercises, so stuff like meditation, etc.? And I hesitate to really push that, and the only reason I say that's because there's a lot of, you know, we said earlier about not necessarily phonies, but, you know, fake guru stuff that goes around. But is there any actual practical applications in regards to the non-physical elements of your work that you tie in?
One of the biggest things and the quickest thing you could do to have better cardio is breath work. It is so simple and it is massive. I actually put up a post recently just showing the kind of difference between one of my athletes' heart rates when they were concentrating on their breath work in between rounds and when they weren't. And it was an extra, like, they dropped an extra 25 beats. And it put them from dropping, like, the recovery level being, like, average to, like, maybe poor to elite level. So it is absolutely essential that you're doing breath work and you're able to control your breath. And because the more you do it, it's a skill. I always say breathing is a skill, right? And it sounds stupid, but it is. And the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with doing certain breath techniques, the quicker you can plummet your heart rate. And the more automatic it'll be, because when you're in a cage or the octagon and thousands of people are screaming at you, you've got your coach in front of you, some people just forget to breathe and they don't control their breath work. Whereas if you've trained it over and over and over again, it becomes automatic.
What's an easy way to do? Sorry, I was just going to say, what's an easy way to do that?
So one of the easiest is do a double inhale, right, through your nose and a long exhale. So it's like that. Now, if you want to get really hippy dippy and fancy with it, you would add visualization into it as well. And that 100%. Has an extra component onto it. So I would always visualize, like, you know, when you're in hospital and you've got your heart rate monitor on the hospital thing going that. I visualize that in my head and I visualize that slowing down. I never thought of it like that. So just things like that, again, will make a massive, massive difference.
It's interesting.
I think it's a case of... Sorry,
you know what it is? I can't see you. So
I know.
It's hard to
normally we got that down.
No, go on, Leo. You're all good.
So I like to tie this in because I was at training yesterday. I just got finally back into jiu-jitsu for the first time in, you know, like a year. So, you know, all these challenges are coming back in terms of conditioning and breath work and stuff like that. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people, you know, make when they're first starting out, you know, not just with jiu-jitsu specifically, but any form of, you know, martial art or even just physical exercises. They don't make a conscious effort to really focus on their breathing. It's like a very common white belt thing to just thrash around, not focus on your breathing, and suddenly you're out of gas inside like 30 seconds. So it's really interesting you bring that up. And of course the visualization thing, I never really thought of it like that. Is there any other examples you could think of just besides, I know you said the heartbeat thing, but in terms of visualization? I'm just piquing my interest.
I think of the beach.
The beach, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be the actual heart itself. It could be something just relaxing, I suppose. Your happy place, maybe.
Right.
Go to your happy place, Leo.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of one. I don't.
Also, quickly, the most optimal recovery position. Get into that as well. So naturally, what do you do when you're tired? You lean forward and you put your hands on your knees, right? That is the most optimal recovery position. That's why you want to do it. Dustin Poirier is absolutely excellent at doing that. He straight away, as soon as the bell goes, he's boom into that position, right? And that's why your body naturally wants to do it. And what it does is it takes the kind of weight off the diaphragm. So that, remember in COVID times, they had patients lie on their front. The reason for that was because it's easier for the diaphragm to open, so your lungs can just get more oxygen in. So when you're in between rounds, you basically want to sit on the stool, but you want to lean forward slightly, so you're allowing that to happen.
What about with athletes? You know, you see a lot of UFC fighters. This is quite a trending thing. Is they don't sit down on the stool. They tend to stand up and put their arms over the cage, with support from their corner. What do you think about that? Is that something that's actually practical or works, or is it a bit of a legend sort of thing?
the only way it works is a psychological thing where the opponent looks across and goes, fucking hell, he's standing up and he's got his hands over the, he looks chill. He looks so fresh. That's the only advantage to it. That's likewise the only disadvantage to kind of leaning over, because your opponent might think, oh, he's tired, when actually he's just recovering very, very well. Right. But from a recovery perspective, is it beneficial doing that? No, not at all.
Interesting.
I want to touch on a couple of just areas of your more business side of things and pick your brain about that in a second. But just before I do, Adam, just to sort of, there may be people listening that think, okay, I'm an amateur or maybe even a professional, because resources don't go very far in this sport. I don't have the ability right now to maybe work with a coach. I don't know any, I can't pay for any, whatever the excuses may be that people come up with. What would be a good piece of takeaway or a template even that people should know if they had no resources whatsoever apart from their phone and access to a gym? What would you say is beneficial for someone to know?
You know what, I'll just break down like a session right now that people should be doing. Right? So
yeah, that'd be perfect.
Like that.
You come in, you warm up, you do what's called a dynamic warm up, which is a warm up through movement. So you're doing kind of this thing rather than just a static hold, right? You're then going to do your plyometrics. Plyometrics is jump training. Okay, so it's basically jumping, box jumps, bounding jumps. You want to do that when you're freshest, okay? You can have as much rest time in between as you want, because it's not conditioning, right? This is about generating power. You're then going to go into your strength work, and it's going to be compound lifts. Compound lifts are multi-joint, multi-movement exercises like the bench press, like the chin-up, like the deadlift, those kind of things, right? And you want to do maybe 3 sets of 5, okay? Have 2 minutes rest in between. While you're resting, you're going to do a bit of mobility work. Maybe you need to work on that shoulder mobility. Maybe you need to work on that hip mobility. It's nothing that's taxing. It's nothing that's going to take away from your next set, but you're getting extra work in. You're going to do that. Then you're going to go on to maybe one more strength exercise. Maybe it's chin-ups, right? Do that. Maybe 3x6 this time. You can even just still do 3x5, okay? Next, you're going to do some accessory work. Accessory work is when you're going to concentrate on areas that maybe a bit more likely to get injured in MMA, whether it's the wrists, the hand, or maybe it's knee exercises to prevent knee injuries and things like that. Then you're going to finally finish off with about 10 minutes of assault bike work. It doesn't even need to be 10 minutes. A really good one's 30 seconds on, 1 minute off, 30 seconds on. Boom, you're done.
I mean, that's a fantastic bit of value there, to be honest. And it's actually a really good template, because you can apply a lot of different exercises within that, right? So when you say compound lift, there's infinite things that you can add in there. And then, of course, you can adapt that to what you need to improve on. So that was really good. I also liked listening to it because it sounded like I was actually reading the personal training textbooks that I used to have.
That's good. Well, that's what you want, yeah.
Yeah, he's absolutely nailed this. But just touching more so on the business element, because like I said, we do talk about the creation side of things on here. And I know we touched a little bit about that briefly. But obviously you have, well, for anyone that doesn't know, you have your own gym, you have your own brick and mortar location, and you have PTs that also work at your establishment as well. So you have labor, staff as well. So you have a lot of things going on. Tell me how you balance out and how you prepare creating the content side of things, because this is always an area where people say, I don't know how, I'm too busy, all of this, but you find a great balance of doing both. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, so don't get me wrong, it is a struggle, but one thing I always said I would do when I opened my gym is I didn't want to be tied to the gym. So I travel a lot with some of my fighters going to various places, so I didn't want to have a stress of needing it covered all the time and messaging people and things like that. So what I did was I got a keypad system on the door. It's open 24 hours. You get your own keypad system, boom. So now I don't have to open the door for you physically. I don't have to be there to let you in. Another thing I did was I decided not to hire staff, right? The reason for that is people bring problems, right? At the end of the day. And what I wanted to do was, look, you can kind of rent space in my gym. So all the PTs that are in my gym, they technically don't work for me. They just rent space. So they pay me X amount per month. They train their clients. I do my thing. I've got masseuses in there as well in these separate kind of rooms. They do the same. But there's never any stress of contracts. There's never any stress of paying people for sick or whatever it is, right? So I always trying to reduce my stress as much as possible. But that being said, I've still got a lot of things to do, so sometimes it is a struggle to get the content creation in with the generating of programs and kind of designing the programs with the one-to-one in-person training. So I recently have sold half my gym to someone who's going to come in and just do all my admin work. And that was something that I really didn't enjoy, and it was something that was putting me off kind of going into the gym and things. I started not to like my own gym because I had like stress because I like associated with negative connotations. So I was like, right, how can I get rid of this? So brought someone in. He's bought half of the gym only, not my online stuff, but the gym only. And he does all the admin, he does all the health and safety, he does all that kind of stuff, dealing with the members and all those kind of things. But that's the kind of way I kind of look at it. You want to reduce your stress as much as possible, basically.
I think that's a sentiment that we definitely share. I mean, I can definitely see some universal truths in there, because it's all about free time and, ensuring you're getting more of that to do the things, not just that you want to do, but the things you're actually good at.
True.
And it's all about, again, it just ties into finding balance. I feel like that word I use more than anything, because when you're working for yourself, you've got to juggle so many different acts, right? So it's about streamlining the process through trial and error. And of course, getting as optimal as you can. I guess that almost circles back to your whole strength and conditioning program as well. It's about being the most optimal version of yourself. Mm-hmm. Is there anything more so on the social media side of things? Because you're talking practically with the admin work. Can you just delve into that specifically, what that entails, that you're freeing up, for other people?
Yeah, so I'll do all my social media myself, and I think the key thing though is you must set time aside to do it. Right? If you don't, you'll just not do it. Like, I'll set the mornings, I'll be my content creation kind of time, and I will set that aside like it is my job, because it is my job. Yeah. People think it's almost like a side thing. Yeah. And it can be, right, at the start, but if you want to grow and you want to make money and you want to experience all these things, then you need to put the work in. So you need to set a few hours aside a day to make content. Like we were talking about, well, I think the guy in Thailand, is it Tom Birch? He makes 20 videos a day. Now, you can say what you like about him, 30. Right? Some people, 30, there you go. Some people like him, some people hate him. I don't really have any opinion of him, but that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work he's putting in. And you get better at it as well. You get more efficient at doing it. The more you do it, the quicker you can do it and the more stuff you can produce. And you've just got to set time aside to actually get it done. And don't be scared of speaking on camera as well. Like, I think that was a big thing that a lot of people put off, is talking on camera, because they're a bit like, oh, what are people going to say? But just do it. No one cares. Yeah,
especially with building a brand as well. I think that's a really important factor, because, with my YouTube channel, I don't tend to use my face so much as I do all the stuff on the podcast and things like that, and that's more so of a practical perspective. But I think for something like you and Will as well, it's so important to inject personality into your brand in order to, because I think it's the best way to maximize your reach, because people will stay for the knowledge, but also because of you and what you bring and represent and bring to the table in terms of knowledge. So that it's infinitely valuable to learn that skill of being able to be confident and talking on camera. So I just wanted to add to that. It's a very good point.
With that content as well, Adam, obviously you said there that you set time aside and you do breakdowns and reviews of strength and conditioning. Of course, you work quite closely with a lot of athletes, not just in MMA, but I know you do football as well, boxing, pretty much just anyone who is in sport of a high level in the Dundee area, you are there with. But how does it work? Or maybe I should change how I'm phrasing that a little bit more. What's the goal with the social media? Of course, it's to grow a brand and to grow more notoriety. Are you using it as a top of the funnel way to get people into maybe a course? Is it they buy a one-to-one? What does that look like?
So basically, I only get paid like money from my top end athletes, right? Like my Paul Craigs, my Chris Duncans, they're the ones that pay me good money, right? My other ones, I use them and the money they pay me to basically cover my travel to and from them, right? And they are used basically as an advertisement board for my programs. So I'll use them to sell my programs, because he's like, oh, he works for so and so, and he works with this Cage Warriors fighter, this PFL fighter. I'll go and buy one of his programs. And then you've also got like you're in a funnel. Then you've got your tiered system where, okay, one of my 10 weeks programs, I think the MMA level 1 10-week programs is like £33, right? So it's £3.30 a week, right? And then you've got the level 2 one, which is obviously a bit more expensive. So you've got that kind of tiered ladder, right? And you've got the personalized programs, then you've got working with me kind of as an online coach full-time kind of thing. But that's what I'm trying to get my social media to do, is basically funnel people into purchasing programs if they want to do it. I'm not particularly good at sales or being a salesman, but that's what I want to do. But also what I want to do, and I think you do it very well, Will, is branch off into other things, because I maybe don't want to be a strength and conditioning coach for the next 10 years. But if I can build my brand and build like
100%.
and show my personality, like you mentioned, Leo, of having my face out there and showing that, then it can diversify into different avenues. Someone might go, Adam, you want to come commentate this MMA event? Brilliant, let's go and do that. Or you do your cooking thing. I'm going to go to Thailand, I'm going to learn how to cook, I'm going to do one of those Thai cooking classes. Maybe it turns into that. You don't know, but you'll never get to know if you don't put yourself out there on social media.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're spot on with that. Sometimes people are always trying to know what it is, right? They're always trying to know what this thing will bring them. What if I create this area of my passion? Let's say it's food, for example. Okay, but what's that going to bring me? Sometimes people, you just don't know, you know? There's just serendipity. You just have to sometimes fulfill it and see what pops up. But talking about sort of diversifying, and I guess this is maybe a nice place to round off, and then I'll throw it over to you, Leo, if you've got anything else you want to touch on. But talking about diversifying there, obviously we've touched on the content aspect, we've touched on the strength and conditioning aspect. You mentioned there that you're going out to Thailand as well. For anyone that doesn't know, I'm sure we'll have another conversation at a time, well, a bit more in depth about this actual travel, but you're going out there for some training. But in regards to your brand and your business, do you, as we said, just do things that you enjoy and see where it takes you? Or is there a sort of rough direction that you want to take this in over the next however many months or years?
I mean, like, I always just want to do stuff I'm enjoying. So, like, I'll be documenting my life and doing things that I enjoy in that, right? So whether it be doing rock climbing in Thailand, or whether it be, and like, people will be following me and they're not following me because I'm going rock climbing. You know what I mean? Like, they don't give a shit about rock climbing. But so there is kind of I wouldn't say there's a plan to do anything. It is more just kind of do what I want. I think if you become too structured with it, then it does become a job, and then it probably loses a slight amount, like a little bit of the enjoyment from it. Whereas if you're just kind of doing what you want and you're documenting it, then I think you kind of got that aspect. I do want to, though, in saying that, do a little bit more traveling and go around different countries and try their traditional martial art. So I'll be doing things like that. But apart from that, no, I just can't do what I want to do.
Nice. I mean, that's not a bad way to wrap it up, really, because I think you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes you don't necessarily have to overthink it, and you will bring those opportunities to you if you create a personal brand. And you do something like strength and conditioning. The world works in very, very weird ways, because when you go rock climbing, you don't realize that knock-on effect that one video is going to lead to this one person, which leads to this one opportunity, which could be the biggest athlete that you've had up to date. It just never works quite as linear. So I think it's always good to sort of embrace that. But Leo, is there anything that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just have one question, just to finish up on this. If you'll indulge me, this is just a very me-specific thing that I'm struggling with. So if you can give me a little bit, a nugget of wisdom.
Get a free bit of labour before we leave.
While you're here. So when I'm training, one thing I always struggle with within jiu-jitsu, I'm talking about specifically here, this happens a lot of times during sparring, is I'm cramping up, or I'll get real tightness, particularly within my legs. Oftentimes when I'm throwing up submissions like triangles, etc., my calves and my quads cramp up like crazy a lot of the time. So sometimes I'm tapping whilst I'm throwing up a submission on someone because of the cramp can be that bad, and then often it results in some knock-on effects and stuff. There's probably a simple answer here, but what's the go-to solution there?
I think you stop being a pussy, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. I was actually going to say the same.
That's fair.
No, sorry. So So that's quite common, right? So they usually say if it's at the end of a session, then it is the whole losing kind of salt, losing electrolytes. You need to kind of replenish your fluids, kind of thing, right? But usually, what I find is they always say a cramping muscle is a weak muscle, right? So what you should do is target your calves and your quads to get stronger, and that will benefit it. Because, yeah, a cramping muscle is a weak muscle. So if it cramps, get it stronger. It's less likely to cramp then. So that's what I would suggest, man.
Perfect.
Stop being such a pussy is the perfect place to end this podcast on. Adam, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure that we'll catch up again. Hopefully when you're in Thailand, hopefully I'll be out there with you, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, man.
And we'll do one in person. But it's been an absolute pleasure. MMA Creators Podcast every Sunday, episode 65, I believe.
I think we're on 64. Maybe it's 65. One of the two.
Which in Thai is Hok Sip Si. There you go, Adam. There's a little bit of language before you go.
Thank you.
As always, peace.